Now. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday, and welcome into today's episode of FreightWaves Now. I'm Kaylee, next here with Anthony Smith.
That's right. And on this episode, we'll talk to Mary O'Connell about how concerned you should be about moving to Mexico if your manufacturing facilities are overseas. We'll also talk with Joanna Marsh and get her rail roundup for the week. But first, our top story deals with what's going on that's good in the world. And that means Grace Sharkey is here to talk about her latest logbook article. Grace, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, guys. Have a happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday, Grace. It's always good to have you here, and always good when we're talking about those feel-good stories in the logbook. You had a pretty good roundup this week, starting off with news from J.B. Hunt.
Yeah, as always, giving back to some really great causes. They have actually been inducted into the Anderson Assembly, which is a philanthropic group of University of Texas MD Anderson's Cancer Center. So they just gave $1 million donation for the J.B. Hunt Transport Services Cancer Prevention and Control Endowment. And this is really exciting. It's, of course, we've seen J.B. give back to University of Arkansas and for really great causes, especially for helping students who are looking to get deeper into the supply chain field. We've seen them give back to their own drivers, and now this is a perfect way for them to give back to communities, maybe even a little bit outside of the trucking and transportation groups. And of course, this center is focused on finding clearly cures, but more importantly, community services for those who are looking to test for cancer, policy interventions, and of course, development of evidence-based strategies to hopefully keep cancer down and especially mortality rates down for those who unfortunately are diagnosed with cancer as well.
And Grace, we also have a story with NFI and the Girl Scouts, but before we get to that, this is from your logbook, and can you tell a little bit about that? Because you're involved with so much. You have SiriusXM, you're so active here on FreightWaves Now, you have great quarter gals. Can you tell us a little bit about the logbook?
Yeah, so of course, my favorite part about this industry is the people that move it the most, which is truck drivers. And on top of, I spend most of my week talking with investors, talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that are being pushed into this industry, of course, for a lot of freight tech needs and investment as well. So I like to take some time out of my week to look at how the industry is giving back to their communities. What's interesting about doing these stories is that sometimes they're harder to find than even the investment stories out there. So for anyone out there who is ever looking to raise more awareness to causes in their communities, or any trucking companies, anyone in this industry who's giving back to their communities in some type of way, always feel free to reach out to me at gsharkey@freightwaves.com. I'm always looking for more of these stories. And it's just a way, I think, on Saturday for us to look back at the real positive stories out of the industry, and that's how we're developing our communities, even outside of keeping shelves stocked every single day.
It's one of my favorite parts of the week is looking forward to that logbook drop on Saturday, because you're right. It's a conversation with things that not only move the goods, but move the whole industry forward. Let's get to the story with NFI and the Girl Scouts. And the Girl Scouts has actually been really active in the truck transportation industry. They've done some stuff with women in trucking, giving girls a chance to see what it's like to be a woman in the transportation industry. What's going on with them in NFI?
Yeah, so I was a Girl Scout. It played a huge factor into my life. I love Girl Scouting. I think it's awesome. It allows women young girls to decide what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, what timetables they want to learn it, and it gets them to recognize different types of industries and career fields out there. And this is a perfect example. You're right, Kaylee. Women in Trucking in 2014, I believe, started this patch. They actually built the curriculum themselves. There's different types of activity books that help showcase, especially the Girl Scout cookies, which we all know and love, how it goes from growing wheat in the fields to the bakeries that they make the cookies, and teaches them the supply chain of even the Girl Scout cookies. And what's fun is that it's an easy way for companies like NFI or anyone out there who's looking to be a part of this too, to work with a local Girl Scout troop and teach them more about the industry. NFI is a perfect example. They just held their Trucks Are for Girls event, which of course helped Troop 15011 earn and gain their badge, and even down to teaching them through a relay race, like how to do a pre-check, loading, unloading procedures, etc. So it's really fun, really cool activities. And I've even seen companies in the past like take girls to different types of like barges and ships, even airplanes. It's not just about teaching women about the trucking side of this industry, but all types of fields within the supply chain too. So I'm actually hoping to put on one of these events. I'm working right now with our local Girl Scout troop, because I think this is the perfect way for you not only to have a fun day with your community, but teach girls about how much we love this industry, right? And hopefully raise another generation of truck drivers as well.
I love that, and I'm so glad that you brought up the point about you trying to get something started with your local troop, because I think that's kind of a scary thing to do, right? Especially for a big company to reach out to a local Girl Scout troop and say, hey, we want to do this with you guys. Do you have any advice on companies who are wanting to take that step and reach out? How do they go about finding a troop leader or finding a troop in your area? And then what does that look like to get it set up?
I would head to girlscouts.com. Even when cooking season comes around, you see them outside of grocery stores selling those things, right? They're hustlers. The Girl Scouts are hustlers when it comes to cookie season. So you'll see them out there and just ask them. The thing about Girl Scouts is a lot of it is investment from the families within Girl Scouts, right? The time, the different types of badges take a lot of your own personal responsibility. That's the good thing and one of the best parts about the program. So I'm sure there's moms and dads out there as well who would love a way to partner and expand the badges that are going to be accessible to their Girl Scout troop. So it's all about kind of putting your hand out there, extending that offer. And I would, at worst case, go to girlscouts.com and you can look up local troops and move forward from there.
Awesome, Grace. And we have another story around a company wearing red on Fridays. Can you tell us a little bit about that one from Warner?
Yeah, so Derek Leathers announced that they're going to continue their Red Fridays, which for people out there, Warner actually has a group or initiative called Operation Freedom, and it's their veteran hiring initiative. It's actually the first apprenticeship program approved by the Department of Labor and Veteran Affairs. And part of that is on Fridays. They encourage their employees to wear red for a group and cause called Remember Everyone Deployed. The point of it, the mission, is that you wear red until everyone who is deployed is technically back. So it's a constant thing that you can be a part of. They actually sell red, or everyone is, Remember Everyone Deployed or red shirts in their store. You can go to Werner's clothing store and actually buy it directly, or you can go to Red's website and buy it as well. But it's a little way that they can give back to veterans outside even of what Operation Freedom does in getting drivers in the seats of their trucks. So, yeah, this is the 5th year that they've entered this partnership, and it's an easy way to remind the veterans and the trucks that, hey, we care for you, and we're here for you, and we support you as a full company.
Grace, so it's so great to see all of these stories coming out from you every week as part of the logbook. If companies are watching this and they have an initiative that they really want highlighted, how can they reach out to you to get that put in the logbook?
Hit me up on LinkedIn, hit me up on Twitter. You'll easily find me there, or just shoot me an email. It's gsharkey, SHARKEY, make sure that E's in there, at FreightWaves.com. And I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, sometimes these stories are more difficult for me to find than some of the investment and financial stories that I focus on as well. So I would love to be able to report on different companies out there and different work and initiatives as well.
Awesome, Grace. Thanks so much for being here this morning, and we'll chat with you a little bit later.
Thank you, guys. Have a good morning.
And of course, you can catch myself and Grace Sharkey this afternoon at 3 o'clock right here for Great Quarter Gals. We're going to toss it on over to the wall. We've got our first carrier update of the morning with Tony Mulvey and Donnie Gilbert.
Welcome into this carrier update. Donnie, going to start here looking, it's Tuesday. We looked at the reefer market yesterday. Going to start here breaking down what's going on in the dry van market. Obviously see a pretty rapid recovery in volumes. Good sign, especially because we're above where we were immediately leading into the holiday.
So overall, our OTVI today was like 10,000, almost 10,800. So we're kind of getting close to that 11,000 mark, which is a little bit better. We want to be over 10. So right here, the dry van's at 770 or 7,701, and it's a little bit higher than where we were when we dropped down into the holiday season. So this is a real good positive note kicking off January. But on the flip side, our rejection rates have dropped down to 4.84. So it's weakening on the rejection rate side. We know that the markets have been deteriorating. You see it there for several months. It's been dropping down, down, down. But we know, again, we've said it 1,000 times, it's just too much capacity in the market. And the way it will correct itself, and the way it's going to correct itself is rates are going to drop, and then people are going to leave the industry. And once that balances out, it'll hold steady. Once it gets a little bit uneven and there's more demand than there is supply, then it's going to start climbing back up.
Yeah, it's the cyclical nature of the trucking market as a whole, right? If you think about it, it works in these waves. And obviously this cycle, the boom run of it, or the bull run, it was prolonged compared to the traditional cycle. I mean,
yeah. And the bus cycle was a lot narrower this time. So here, these cycles are changing just a little bit. If we change our chart here, go to the next chart, to follow up on this, we see our tender lead times. We see it bounce up for Thanksgiving, and it came back down almost to normal. Normal for dry vans, around 2.5 days. So I stayed a little bit above that. No big deal. Back up here to 3.3 days, and then now it's down to 2.56, and it's working its way back down to the normal. So we see there's no pressure, even in the dry van section, on shippers. And if there's no pressure on shippers, that means they're not willing to pay more. They don't have the excitement where they need to run these loads faster, or the time sensitive freight is not there.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for, time sensitive. So as long as they're not under pressure, they're not going to pay more.
yeah, and this is where looking at it holistically, looking at lead times, at rejections, you can see what both sides in the market are, how they're feeling and dealing with this pressure, or if there's any pressure. I mean, you look at this, you see it come back down. I mean, we're below any point we were, since mid-October, really? I mean, that's the concerning part, especially as you go in. If there is no time sensitivity, we're just not going to see any bump in rates.
And the problem with that is when the rates did bump and the time sensitivity was there, you had a lot of people leave their contracted freight and run the spot market. Can they get back to that now?
Yep, that'll be the thing to pay attention to. Donnie, thank you so much for this update. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee Nix.
Guys, time for our first check of headlines on FreightWaves.com this morning. A boutique investment group is offering underutilized airports outside of major metro areas a cargo-in-a-box solution aimed at deploying quick-starting infrastructure to take advantage of expedited logistics needs. As major airports continue to concentrate resources on passenger operations, cargo infrastructure has suffered, leaving many airports without enough capacity to handle expanding demand. Burrell Aviation wants to deliver airports with financing, construction, marketing, leasing, and operation of cargo services in exchange for long-term ground leases. And it now has 22 airports in its portfolio. A near-term business plan for the company is to engage 30 to 40 other airports who need development deals for cargo. A Missouri woman has been sentenced to 2 years in prison for committing Paycheck Protection Program loan fraud. Kristen Schultz has already serving 6 years and 8 months in prison for embezzling over $700,000 from the trucking company she worked at, and will now add an additional time onto her sentence. Schultz pleaded guilty to 3 counts of bank fraud back in September. According to authorities, she was able to obtain 2 PPP loans for over $27,000 in April of 2021, about 8 days before she was sentenced for her original crime. And Mexico continues to be a risky place to run for truckers as cargo thefts rose 4.5% year over year in November. Mexico's Secretariat of Security and Citizen Protection recorded 1,181 cargo theft incidents, about 39.5 a day in November. To compare that, a total of 214 thefts happened in the United States during the entire second quarter of last year. Mexican authorities tallied almost 12,000 total crimes committed against carriers from January through November of 2022, a 7% increase year over year for that same time frame. You can find these stories and more on FreightWaves.com, as well as on our FreightWaves app. And if you're watching us live on YouTube or on social, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with our first check of weather. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our first check of the weather. And yes, we are still talking about this major storm impacting the coast of California. And really, nothing has changed from it, except we're still watching it hit everywhere from the California-Oregon border down to the far reaches of Southern California into LA and down into San Diego. Let's check it out in sonar critical events. We're going to be keeping a pretty decent watch on this storm because it's kicking up so much moisture moving through the Rockies right now. That's going to turn into our next major storm here in about 3 to 4 days. And ahead of that, we've already got some severe weather warnings in place, as well as the Storm Prediction Center has outlined a severe weather watch for the next 3 days and outlook for the next 3 days. But moving back into California for what's going on right now. Heavy rain is still pushing in along the western coast. You can see on the radar there, we've got a pretty intense line of storms embedded in this rain as well. So we do have some actual strong thunderstorms moving through the San Luis Obispo area, in through the I-5 corridor, and then down into Santa Barbara, moving into LA. Because of that, we've got a flood warning in place from all the way from San Luis Obispo down into the Santa Barbara area, the LA Metro underneath a flood warning, as well as down in between LA and Oceanside towards San Diego. High wind advisories in place, high wind warnings in place for those highest elevations. It is still an absolute mess out there. Good news for those folks in Monterey Bay, and the Salinas area. Your rain is going to pull back into the east a little bit today, so you will get some relief from that heavy rainfall, but onshore flow still bringing some really extreme winds and some really high waves there. So that coastal erosion is a really big factor. US 101 has pieces of it that are closed due to landslides, and then the Pacific Coast Highway, Highway 1, is completely closed in some places because that road has experienced that coastal erosion and has washed away in some places. It's really just a pretty difficult situation out there, and will continue to be here through the next few days. So if you're out in California, just make sure you are staying safe, avoiding any of those closed roadways, taking your time as well. We'll continue to talk about this later on throughout the show today. Right now, we're going to toss it back over to Anthony Smith.
Awesome, Kaylee. Thank you so much for that update. Right now, we're welcoming on our very own Joanna Marsh. Joanna, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Joanna,
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Okay, that's good.
So let's kick it off with a couple of roundup stories from rail over the last week. Of course, one of the big ones that we heard of was from Greenbrier. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah. So Greenbrier operates out of Oregon, and their Portland facility, which manufactures rail cars and also some barges, they actually decided to stop rail car production there, kind of looking at sort of where demand is, and sort of they made that decision there, which which they said was pretty sad for them, because considering that the Portland facility has actually been operating for over 100 years, so, and it's the flagship facility, so that's sort of the big change that they announced formally the other day.
We heard about this from Mike yesterday, and I kind of asked him what that looks like, how quickly they will transfer some of those cars into service and make them rotate through back into and out of service. Any idea on what it looks like for them getting their remaining cars into service before they shut down the facility?
Yeah, I mean, they are going to keep it open until they have there's an existing contract that they need to fulfill, so it will be open for a little while still. And they did mention that their other production facilities should be able to take up the slack, after they do close the Portland facility. Greenbrier acquired American Railcar Industries in 2019, and so they still have facilities, and they actually also in response to one of the investors during the earnings call, they are planning to keep the existing production in the U.S. still in the U.S., unlike moving it to Mexico. Unlike another rail car manufacturer, Freight Car America, they actually closed their U.S. facilities and consolidated everything and moved everything to one big facility in Mexico. So there is still the U.S. component for Greenbrier.
Story. Of course, it does sound like there's something going on more so in the industry, not just for Greenbrier. Is that the right assessment here?
Yeah, it's interesting because then again, one of the things that Lori Tekorius, who is the president and CEO of the company, she had said that part of the reason for the move, or to shut down or cease production there at Portland, was because a lot of the demand is actually coming from, a lot of the activity, I should say, is coming from the Midwest for markets in the Southeast and East Coast. And so to have a production facility out in the Pacific Northwest is kind of far, compared, you still have to bring everything in. And so they said that they wanted to be closer to where there's market need for their product.
Totally understandable and sad for Greenbrier, but excited to see what they do going forward. Let's move on to our next story in Rail Roundup. Patriot Rail completing their acquisition of a short line in Louisiana. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they had actually announced that they were acquiring Delta. Was it? I can't remember the name, but it's in Louisiana. I think it's like Delta Southern. Forgive me if that's wrong. And so they were able to finalize that purchase after regulatory review. It's interesting, again, kind of, I was thinking about all these stories this morning, and, you have Greenbrier wanting to move operations to the Midwest to take advantage of the Gulf markets and the East Coast markets and the Midwest markets, of course. And then you have Patriot, which is a short line operator. I think it operates, I think in 23 states, but, it's another short line for them that's operating not necessarily on the Gulf, but along the Mississippi River in Louisiana. So you have that sort of wanting to have more of a Gulf Coast presence. They're Patriot Rail is based in Jacksonville, and I think they have. I don't quite remember. I think most of their assets are concentrated in the East Coast and Gulf. They do have something in California, and maybe it's other places. But that's just another, kind of thinking about supply chain flows and the Gulf and the East Coast and the Midwest, and companies trying to position themselves to take advantage of those markets.
An interesting story coming out around BNSF and hydrogen, and this project sounds really intriguing. Can you tell us about this one as well?
Yeah. So BNSF has signed a memorandum of understanding with Bakken Energy, which is trying to produce hydrogen. And Bakken Energy itself is working with several Midwestern states to create this hydrogen center. And Bakken Energy, I think they are planning to use you have the natural gas production and trying to see like what kind of what can you do to produce hydrogen out of that existing production. So they're looking at carbon capture and sequestration as one of those ways. And the reason BNSF is included in this is because obviously you need ways to transport the hydrogen, and so it's looking at you produce it, and so how can we distribute it once it happens, and it's what's what a lot of partnerships do, trying to work at different components and different pieces simultaneously, as opposed to, okay, we produced it, now we got to figure out how to move it. So it'll be interesting to see how they how that partnership comes along, and actually also BNSF itself. They have been trying to look at different locomotive technologies. They have the battery electric locomotives that they've been testing out in California, and of course hydrogen locomotives is something that a lot of other railroads are looking at as well. So the railroads in general have an interest, or at least the big class ones have an interest in pursuing this. How does hydrogen fit into our power options and things like that.
I'm glad that you bring that up, because especially when we talk about alternative fueling on the truck transportation side or the passenger vehicle side, we often see hydrogen as this kind of like viable middle step between diesel power and electrification, right? It can be sequestered off of natural gas use. You can go ahead and carbon capture it. And that's that really important middle step that I think not a lot of folks really kind of focus on. Are we looking at any timeline for BNSF possibly looking at using that hydrogen power?
Sure. they didn't give any particular timelines in the release from the other day, but I know it's something that that BNSF and other railroads are actively working on. It's a little scoop here. I I had interviewed Wabtec several recently about sort of their partnership with two national laboratories, Oak Ridge, and also Argonne. I'll be writing that up sometime soon, and also was able to speak with someone at Wabtec about hydrogen locomotives, because it's funny because I write about them and I read about all these locomotive technologies, and but don't really aren't really able, for the purposes of the articles, aren't really able to get too much into exploring sort of the whys and sort of what next of a locomotive technology in hydrogen. And so I'm working on it now, and I'm looking forward to having that out there, and I think it'll be pretty neat. Wabtec, the guy I spoke with, was really enthusiastic and had a lot of interesting things to say about where the industry might find use for hydrogen.
Awesome, Joanna. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll be seeing more of you again, I'm sure, especially with your new show.
Oh yes, it's starting up, so it'll be great. And take care to you both.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanna. And catch her and Mike Bowden is still on People Speaking Rail. Right now, we're going to toss things over to Christian Thomas. He's got a first check of what's trending on social media.
Last night, and even though it didn't seem like a big game because it looked like a season opener for the Georgia Bulldogs, but the Dogs, they're back-to-back national champions. Let's take a look back at the moment Kirby Smart picked up that trophy once again this year.
And the Georgia Bulldogs.
Isaiah, we're Georgia boys, so we're big Georgia fans, and we're going to have a little bit of fun this morning because I got a few tweets. But before I get to them, UGA winning last night was the largest margin of victory for a championship game at 58 points, and it's the most scored in a national championship with 65 points. I just want to point out, especially for Tony Mulvey here, that UGA surpasses the University of Tennessee with the most wins at 868 all-time wins. Tony, sorry. Now let's have a little bit of fun. Here's some tweets, a recap of the national championship game. Let's just watch.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
Puny God.
Yeah, gotta put in some Georgia Marvel, especially for me and Isaiah. Big fans of both. And then I got this tweet here. Pretty interesting. Not too much about Georgia, but pretty hilarious. Romulus Augustus watching the fall of Rome, colored in 476 AD. Yeah, Nick Saban up there for commentating for College Football Day. But anyways, that does it for the Social Roundabout. We're going to take it to a quick break, and we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now on this Tuesday morning. It's time for our next look at the weather this morning. We are watching our next major storm system set up kind of across the middle parts of the country, eventually looking to bring once again some heavy snowfall to the Midwest into the Great Lakes. They're going to get a couple of rounds here before we see the main event happen in the next few days or so. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We talked about what's going on in California, that influx of moisture bringing a lot of snow-making possibility through the upper parts of the Rockies. And this is what's going to eventually turn into that next major storm system for the upper Great Plains and into the Midwest. Right now, ahead of that, we've got some light snowfall as well as some mixed precipitation going on crossing the Indiana-Ohio border and hanging out around Michigan. None of this is going to be too impactful, but it is pretty slow moving. Accumulation is going to be light, but we could see some possible traffic impacts just with some bridges and overpasses seeing some of that accumulation from both the freezing rain, maybe some ice, and definitely some snow in some places. Further behind that, we do have that next major storm setting up across the Rockies right now. And with that, we've got winter weather advisories in place across Idaho, in through Utah, and then out into the I-70 corridor of Colorado. Central Wyoming seeing some wind and some snow right now as well, but there's not a whole lot going on right there in the center of Wyoming. I-80 looking mostly clear across Wyoming right now. Other than that, we are just going to keep paying attention to what's going on in California, and the winter weather advisories in place as that moisture continues to move onshore. Not expecting a break from the onshore flow or the moisture anytime soon, but little pockets of California will start to see a little bit of break in the rain today. Still going to come back here as we end our week. We're going to keep a watch on these systems as they continue to move to the southeast because they will bring a severe weather threat coming up later on in the week for some of us down here. We'll talk about that coming up in our next look at weather. Right now, we're going to toss it over to Anthony Smith. He's here with Mary O'Connell.
Awesome, Kaylee, thanks so much for that update. And that's right, we have Mary O'Connell here. And Mary, we're talking about a topic that everyone just can't get enough of right now, and that's around nearshoring and reshoring. Good morning.
Good morning, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm not doing too bad for a Tuesday morning.
So, Mary, how well would you be doing if you had $1 every time someone mentioned nearshoring or reshoring to Mexico? And of course, this is adjusted for inflation.
Well, I think I would probably have enough dollars to maybe, take a trip to Mars or definitely own my own exotic island.
So this is definitely a big topic that a lot of people are talking about, and it seems like it's been slowly building up a lot of momentum over the past few years, but really it's all coming to a head now. What are going to be some of the things that people need to watch for or look for, or any tips around this whole factor of if they should move to Mexico or around reshoring to Mexico?
I mean, we've seen it even in some of our own virtual events. We've had Rosemary Coates on, who's been very heavily involved in, helping people reshore or nearshore back to Mexico. There's really a lot to consider, and it's more than just, my stuff is going to be closer, so it's going to be better. That's not necessarily the solution for everyone. So it's really time to look at how are your manufacturers manufacturing costs? Are they rising and rising and rising? Does going down to Mexico, does that actually help? Because sometimes, you know, you might have facilities in Asia or other parts of the world that they have more of the raw resources or the raw materials there that they don't have to then ship those raw materials. So it's kind of it's important to take a step back and say, okay, like, well, what am I trying to manufacture? How readily available are these things that I'm the raw materials to make the products that I need? But also, again, my transportation costs might be lower, but then I have to, you know, get a good customs broker. I have to do my own due diligence to find reputable shippers and reputable manufacturers in Mexico that I can work with. So it's kind of a whole other process and whole other time sink that you're gonna be spending all of your time on, looking for these suppliers, looking for these vendors, and, you know, starting up business in Mexico that you already have established, maybe over in Asia. There could be some cost benefits. It's just a matter of sitting down, looking, and, you know, just doing some homework and getting down into it.
We've talked with Noy Mahoney about this a lot because, of course, he's our Borderlands writer. And one of the questions that I brought up is that you've got now this kind of increased scrutiny and maybe even some increased regulations going on with Mexico and U.S. tensions. You're talking about manufacturing in Mexico, then bringing it into the U.S. You obviously have that closer cross-border component, but it's a pretty tight ship when you talk about relations between the U.S. and Mexico. And that means that if you are a shipper, you're going to have someone who's really well-versed in those regulations. What is your best advice on finding someone who knows how to do that? Are you looking for like a really good customs broker? Are you looking to find that maybe in-house? What's your advice?
So we this is actually oddly perfect. On Check Call today, we talked to Jordan Dewart, and he had a really funny comment that is, you know, you date your shippers or you date your carriers, but you marry your customs broker. And to me, that's just really funny because it's true. I mean, even if you're dealing with ocean shipment, cross-border, anything coming into or out of the United States, you want that customs broker because they could save you thousands or they could cost you thousands. So whether or not it's just making sure the proper paperwork is filled out or, you know, not having any delays like that, having a good customs broker is going to be the number one thing that you want to work with. And, also making sure that you have someone that's CT-PAT certified. So that's it's a voluntary program that is an extra level of security and validity that comes with you know, trade. And so if you know that you have someone on both sides of the border that's CT-PAT certified, you know that they've gone through pretty rigorous security standards, and it's not a small process by any means. It is voluntary and it does help. It just kind of adds another layer of like, yeah, like we're all in this. This is legit, because the number one thing to think of is all this opportunity is coming to Mexico. It's been widely reported on. It's been well known. And for any big change or whatever, there's going to be someone that's always going to try to look and make a quick buck. And for that, you really want to do your homework to make sure that someone that you're working with is reputable and isn't just going to magically disappear the next day.
And really, with all the business potentially moving to Mexico, do you see this as something that can really potentially add to congestion at the border, or really kind of hamper wait times? Do you see this as being an issue, or is this almost like a wait and see what happens?
I think it's going to be a mix of both. So right now we're already seeing congestion at some of the border ports, depending on where it is. They have that easy pass system that, you know, lets certain drivers or certain carriers just kind of go through. It's really just a matter of how quickly everybody gets facilities built down there. I think they said that they have over like 400 inquiries to certain regions of Mexico for just, you know, building space down there and building warehouses and manufacturing. So it's really going to be a matter of where these facilities are built. If they're all built in the same area, yeah, we're probably going to see increased border times in the closest port of entry to that location. But across all of the ports, there could be some extra waiting. It's just kind of a hurry up and wait and see, because also on the Mexican side, they are doing their own programs. They are working to digitize and, you know, try to speed things along, because they do know that this influx is coming. And so they're really taking the time now to invest in a lot of those infrastructure programs to make sure that they are ready and able to fulfill this extra demand, because they know that if they don't, they're going to get all the bad press and they're going to lose all these relationships that they just built and all this business coming. So it's really getting taken seriously on both sides. And I'm excited to see what could happen, but we could see some increased wait times at the border.
So Mary, obviously you are our 3PL expert. You host Check Call, which is the show for 3PL information. Let's round this out by talking about the opportunities that exist for 3PLs and for brokers as we're seeing more of this shift to the nearshored manufacturing. Maybe if you aren't a customs broker, or you're a brokerage that maybe wants to get into figuring that out, this is a good chance to do it right before we see that huge influx. What do you need to learn, or how do you take that first step to start becoming that offering and giving that offering to your customers?
I'd say that if you're thinking about it, find a good customs broker and just talk to them first. See, like, you know, okay, so if I get a shipment, like before you even go find a shipper for it, find a customs broker and say, okay, if I get a shipment, what do I need? What capabilities do I need? What capabilities do I need to do business with you on your end? And start there. Start at a conversation. I know in logistics and transportation, we're always a little reluctant to humble ourselves and, you know, admit that we might not know anything. So if you aren't interested in hiring someone to kind of lead the charge and, you know, serve as your like director of cross-border that might have years and years of experience doing it, then I would just start talking to a good customs broker and ask them, like, okay, what things do we need to see? What things do we need to look for? And I would start small. You know, you don't have to go out right away and say, oh, I've landed $100 million of cross-border freight. No, just start with like a couple loads here and there, get your feet wet, and then build your confidence from there. And for those that aren't interested in doing cross-border freight and are just interested in staying within the lower 48, I would definitely start creating a presence around Nuevo or around Laredo, Texas, and really just, you know, increase your Texas offering and make sure that you have strong and reliable carriers down there that you can call on to help you move freight, because all those facilities down there, if it's a 3PL owned, like those are going to get busy, and there's going to be more than enough freight for everyone to go around. So just definitely make sure that you start beefing up some of your cross-border presence, and you know, maybe start looking for shippers that ship out of Texas or Southern California or other parts that might have a port of entry into the U.S.
Awesome, Mary. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. As Kaylee mentioned, you have Check Call real quick before we let you go. What time does that air?
Check Call airs right here on FreightWaves TV, so you don't need to refresh the page or anything. Just keep watching. It'll be on today at 12:30, and then if you really, really want, you can subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/checkcall. That comes out at 2:00 this afternoon, and yeah, it's just a Check Call filled day today.
There you go. We love to see it. Thanks, Mary. We'll catch you this afternoon on Check Call here on FreightWaves TV. We're going to head back on over to the wall for our next carrier update.
Welcome into this carrier update, Donnie. Got an interesting chart here to start out. We're looking at rejection rates, and there's the highest rejection rate on a lane across the country. Guess where it is? Iowa, or that western Midwest.
Iowa, Nebraska. So I want to throw this out there. I've actually never pulled this one up before, but you know, here we're looking at drive-in rejection rates, and they're at 4.84%. Well, there are other areas that have higher percentage, but if you look at the market sometimes, you may not exactly see what all's going on. So what I've brought up, it's a heat map and it's drive-in rejection rates broken down by lanes. Now, this is a huge heat map. It takes a 20, 30 seconds to pull up because there are so many lanes. You know, sometimes there's maybe only 4 or 5 lanes per market. Sometimes there's 30, 40, 50, lanes per market, like LAX. So it takes a while to pull up, takes a while to sort. But all I did was just want to kind of show this and see how we can use it. I sorted it by the highest rejection rate. So even though we're at 4.84%, well, if we bring up drive-in rejection rates, Des Moines to Omaha, it's at 17.06%. Quite a different story of what we see. Now, it is in red, it is going down, but you can pull these up on charts as well, which we'll do here, and I'll show you how in just a few minutes. But anyways, we have Des Moines to Sioux Falls, 16.5%. Des Moines to Eau Claire, 14.69. Now, we do have a Denver to Billings in here, 14.2. A lot of Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, 13 to Des Moines, 13.6. Cedar Rapids, St. Louis, 13.58. But we're kind of getting the gist of where these are at. And it's in that Midwest, kind of the western, northwestern corner of the Midwest. In that area, kind of, like I say, west of Chicago. So probably a lot of lanes out Chicago run out there. It's those areas. It's a lot more rural that people don't want to run out to. But that might be where you find these higher rates. Go to the next chart here. I'll show you. If you go to a regular chart, you'll type in VOTRI dot, let's say ATL. But if you don't hit enter, if you freeze, you'll see it'll pull up some lanes, and you're basically putting both airport codes in, the to or the from and the to. So you can do the ATL ABE if you want to go to Allentown, ATL BHM for Birmingham, and you'll see this pop up. You go down and choose them if you want to, and that's how you'll pull this up on a chart. Go to the next chart here, and I have a few already pulled up here for us. So Atlanta, I first brought up the rejection rates for Atlanta, which are 1.87%. Very, very low, below 2% now. But if we went Atlanta to Chicago, it's 3.5%. Atlanta to Dallas, 3.51%. And Atlanta to Denver, 2.08%. And you can see how these go up and down and follow the trends. So this is still a good, useful tool if you want to investigate certain lanes. You may not find your exact lane, Tony. But let's say you're going to the Northeast. Let's say you're going to Baltimore and from Atlanta. You may find Atlanta to Philadelphia, but not exactly Baltimore. But it'll give you a really good idea of maybe the Southeast to the Northeast to the Midwest, etc.
Yeah, it's a great way to, one, visualize it, but also take into account those dynamics, right? I mean, you're looking here at 3.5% compared to under 2%. Well, a rate here might just be better than the generic outbound rate of Atlanta.
Exactly, sir.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you, Donnie. Right now, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
FreightWaves Now. Now, believe it or not, there was a big game on last night, and it didn't look like a big game. It didn't look like the national championship. It looked like a season opener for the Georgia Bulldogs because, I tell you what, they went off on TCU. Let's take a look at Kirby Smart picking that trophy up again.
And the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, how about them Dogs winning back-to-back? Now, me and Isaiah Buchanan, we're Georgia boys, so we're going to have a little bit of fun today. And Zach's in here, and I just want to point out, Zach, that Georgia has surpassed the University of Tennessee with the most all-time wins of 868 wins. Let's take a look at a preview of one Twitter account posted.
God, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
Puny God.
Yeah, I gotta throw in some Marvel there. And let's take a look at this other Twitter post I found last night. It had me rolling. It doesn't really pertain to Georgia winning, but it's a picture of Nick Saban up there watching the game, and the comment saying, Romulus Augustus watching the fall of Rome in colorized. It's too funny for me. And I just want to point out also that Georgia had the largest margin victory in a national championship game and the most points scored in a national championship game. I think TCU didn't even deserve to score that one touchdown they had. Anyways, that does it for Social Roundabout. Toss it over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All I know is I saw Nick Saban there last night, and my first thought was, he doesn't even go here. He doesn't belong.
Well, all
Get
I'm
out.
saying in 2023, New Mexico State, we want Georgia.
New Mexico State wants Georgia to write them a check.
Yes.
That's what they want.
We'll give you a good homecoming game.
Hey, this is good marketing, Anthony. You should really go market for the NMSU football team.
I would be happy to. I mean, my alma mater, I am a proud alum, and I am excited that they got that bowl game win this year.
And how about you take your marketing to our virtual event that's this week and give them some advice as well. We've got the Sales and Marketing Summit coming up in just about 2 days, and we're not going to go too deep on this because we'll talk with Tony Mulvey about this coming up in just a few minutes. But it is going to be a fun event, a virtual event. It is free to attend, so make sure that you go and get signed up before it is too late. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the last 24 hours in freight with our market recap, and then we'll be right back.
Coming to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Good day coming.
Welcome into this carrier update, Donnie. We're going to start on a topic we've touched on a lot, so not going to spend a ton of time on it. Diesel fuel, that retail price is continuing to move lower.
Yeah, so we saw this bounce back up. This is our rack price here in green. This is my first main concern here. It bounced back up. It slowed the fall of diesel fuel, kind of make it hold steady there. Back down, got a little excited. We see diesel fuel drop a few cents, then it picked back up. And that's when that volatility starts kicking in, and station owners don't want to really drop their prices, but they have just a few more cents. So what's happened is they've really slowed that rate of diesel fuel dropping, but it is going down. So national average, 470. But this is there's a real big spread on this national average. Let's go to the next chart here and look and see what I'm talking about here. So you can bring up the DTS in all the markets. So here in blue, I've brought up here, it's Philadelphia. And you see Philadelphia is quite different. You see it peak up above $5 there for quite some time. And it's come down, it's only down to 516.
Yeah.
So here, the national average, being where it's at right now, this is, 30, 40 cents above that. Now, I went over and I brought up some more so you can see that you can run in your sonar and pull up different markets. Chicago, quite different, 454. Indianapolis, 487. Dallas, Texas, down, of course, where a lot of the oil is, 410.
Yep.
And then LAX, 560, which is one of the highest markets in the U.S.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here, look at this Dallas one, and you saw the rack price. It follows the rack price a lot closer than some of these other markets, right? Where we saw that upward movement in the rack price, you saw an upward move at the retail locations in Dallas, where really across the other markets you have pulled up here, they still continue to decline, which indicates their spread was probably so wide that they had that room.
Yes, where Dallas, the spread's not quite so wide, they couldn't absorb it. It's going to follow it, like you said, a lot closer. It's a really good point here, Tony. So keep an eye on this. The markets you operate in, you can bring these up and be very wise to kind of go through them and see where the optimal places to fuel your trucks are, especially since this is one of the top 2 expenses that you're going to incur.
Yeah, because I mean, you could have, if we brought it up, I mean, you could have neighboring markets where you're talking 20, 30, 40 cent a gallon differences if you cross over into the next market. So I mean, and that can make or break when you're buying hundreds of gallons worth of fuel. So I mean, those pennies really do add up to a lot of dollars.
You said hundreds of gallons of fuel, and then you multiply that times 500 trucks.
Yeah.
That could be
thousands
per day.
Yeah.
And then multiply that by 365, it could be almost millions that you can save. And this directly off to be direct profit, if you can save that. So yes, one more chart here real quick here. We'll run through, kind of see where our NTI is. It dropped back down just a little bit, Tony. Our average is starting to curve down, and we're down to $2.67. And there's nothing in the near future to really try to turn that around or bring that back up, except for maybe a Thursday or a Friday.
Yeah.
Just that boom at the end of the week a little bit. But it seems like we're headed back in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. As that capacity returns from the holidays, those rates are heading downward. So, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. Right now, we'll hand it over to Kaylee Nix.
All right, guys, thank you for that update. It's time now for a check of your 10 a.m. top stories on FreightWaves.com. A Missouri woman has been sentenced to 2 years in prison for committing Paycheck Protection Program loan fraud. Christine Schultz is already serving 6 years and 8 months in prison for embezzling over $700,000 from the trucking company that she worked at, and now she will add additional time onto her sentence. Schultz pleaded guilty to 3 counts of bank fraud back in September. According to authorities, she was able to obtain 2 PPP loans for over $27,000 in April of 2021, about 8 days before she was sentenced for her original crime. Mexico continues to be a risky place to run for truckers as cargo thefts rose 4.5% year over year in November. Mexico's Secretary of Security and Citizenship recorded 1,181 cargo theft incidents, about 39.5 a day. To compare that, a total of 214 thefts happened in the U.S. during the whole second quarter of 2022. Mexican authorities tallied almost 12,000 total crimes committed against carriers from January through November of 2022, a 7% increase year over year in the same time frame. Transportation and logistics analysts have split opinions on the state of the freight industry for 2023. Morgan Stanley analyst Ravi Shankar has turned more constructive on his thoughts, raising his industry outlook to in line from cautious. He said that there are some key leading indicators, like the fact that Morgan Stanley's in-house data sets have stopped falling. Susquehanna Financial Group has dropped their opinion on the market, dipping the view to neutral from positive. Analyst Basecomb Major said that lingering volume softness, a rollover in contract pricing, and pressure from equipment gains will lead to a hard-to-stomach first quarter for the industry. The Transportation Research Board has stated they expect the shift from West to East Coast for imports to continue. East Coast ports have spent a ton of capital on improving infrastructure. That gained a lot of praise from board members who say those investments have yielded facilities with the ability to take on the world's largest ships. However, people are now questioning if the East Coast has the warehouse capacity to handle the increase in imports. Warehouses on the East Coast generally have vacancy rates at 3% or below, and at one point, Savannah got down to 0.1% vacancy. However, the Southeastern coast has the most room to add more warehouse space as needs grow. And Andrew Clark, the former CFO at brokerage C.H. Robinson, has said he would seriously consider an offer from the board to come back to the company as CEO following last week's firing of Bob Biesterfeld. Clark served as CFO from 2015 to 2019, called it a fascinating opportunity to take on the leadership role. However, sources speculate that he is kept busy with multiple business interests that might take him away from the job. C.H. Robinson is using a search firm to find Biesterfeld's replacement, and so far, no formal offer has been made. You can find these stories and so much more on FreightWaves.com and on our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. And of course, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to catch anything that you might have missed from this week. We're going to toss things back over to Anthony. He's here with Tony Mulvey to talk about this week's Sales and Marketing Summit.
Awesome, Kaylee. Thanks so much for those updates. And that's right, we have an event coming up this Thursday, and I have our very own Tony Mulvey to chat about it now. Tony, what's happening on Thursday?
Yeah, so first live or virtual event of the year. We've got the Sales and Marketing Summit coming on Thursday. So going to touch a lot of how to, it's going to be a combination of things, how to sell in this market, what role marketing plays in all of this, what tips and tricks you can have kind of as marketers and sales reps in the environment that we're in, but also that makes you stand out from a crowd, because I mean, you're starting to see this space as a whole, it kind of becomes congested, right? You see it on LinkedIn, you see it on Twitter, there's just so many little nuances in freight, and there's got to be a way to stand out from the crowd. And this is the ability with the speaker lineup that we have. You see a lot of different aspects and some of those most active people in the industry that have had success in the sales and marketing space.
So, Tony, one of the big things for us is like, okay, you look at you and me. We're analysts, economists, researchers, and we're not directly involved with sales. And thank God for that, because I could not sell anything. But we are a part of sales. Everyone's a part of sales. And so just because you're not directly a salesperson or a sales or account executive or anything like that, doesn't mean that you don't have anything to take away from this, because we're all a part of the sales process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, me and Kevin Hill had a conversation on Put That Coffee Down about generating research to generate sales and things like that. It's these marketing and sales efforts. It's not just as easy as you call up somebody on the phone and say, hey, let me tell you about our product, right? You got to have this way to engage. And I think that's the key that we're going to talk about in the theme of the summit, is bringing that engagement so it's not so salesy or so marketing. Because I mean, you see it all the time, right? Buzzwords of what's happening in 2023. I mean, it's trying to break away from that, but also use it to your advantage, right? You want to include them because, I mean, buzzwords obviously grab people's attention. That's why they are buzzwords. But you also need to be able to separate yourself from just the buzzwords, like bring that meaningful content. And I think that's the key. Is you've seen a lot, especially with the rise of things like TikTok, and I've mentioned it before, LinkedIn and that algorithm. I mean, bringing content that would be useful for the people that you're selling into, that, hey, I know you may not have an hour or 30 minutes to talk, but here's a 1-minute clip that I thought you might find something useful. Generating just those little snippets of content can go a long way in just forming relationships. And I think that's going to be the key, and a lot of what's going to be talked about in the Sales and Marketing Summit, because right now those relationships are so important.
Mention that because there are nuances in this, right? So when you think about sales and marketing, there's been so much of, I think, a shift over just like the last 3-4 years, never mind, looking at a decade ago, because those sales tactics that you may have grown up with or seen kind of played out in movies or really kind of see as textbook, they're not really as applicable. Some of them are, the core principles are still there, but there's a whole new process to go about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you start looking at companies and like hiring practices and look at what they're looking for: social media coordinators and content creators, because that's really where it's almost like this next generation of leaders it's what they I don't want to say grew up in, but they've had to evolve over time, because social media has become such a large part of everything, right? Whereas I don't say the older days, but you think back, I mean, just think back 10 years ago or 12 years ago, like before Twitter was really a big thing, or LinkedIn was still in the early stages. Like, they weren't useful tools then. Well, now they're very useful, because it's a way to create engagement on a very, I don't say less professional way, but more personal way, and less transactional, right? You actually have that relationship with somebody. You're able to generate content that is targeted, but also relatable. And I think that's the key. It's because it's not a one-size-fits-all product or process, the sales and marketing. You have to be able to, the flexibility and the little nuances that come from it, you've got to be able to adjust to those. And I think that's going to be a key. And you'll hear, again, leaders that are actual experts in the field. They're people that I see on LinkedIn and Twitter and TikTok constantly, and then also generating other forms of content. I mean, I think Blythe has a fireside chat about talking about podcasts. Seems like everybody wants to get into the podcast game, but there's ways to go about it to grow, but to also make it worth your time, where those podcasts generate revenue and you're able to turn it profitable. So it'll be interesting to see all of these chats with all these great individuals that are in the sales and marketing thing every day.
That you mentioned there, and I'm going to put them together because they're in two different sentences. You said generate and you said chat, and the first thing that comes to my mind is AI, and I can only imagine that even though we just talked about how much sales and marketing has changed over the last 3 years, I feel like the change is going to shift that much faster with the prominence of AI coming up now, and this is, I think, going to be one of the topics that we hit on throughout the marketing event.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something I looked at yesterday just because I was interested. You've heard, I mean, obviously Chat GPT, right? And I was just like, you put in like 3 words and you get a high level like overview of what you're looking for. And I think that's going to be a key moving forward is people want high level things, right? They want little quick snippets, but at a high level of things that they don't understand. And it can be used in this market. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not, considering it's generated. But I mean, there's still room for this in the sales and marketing space overall that, hey, if we can make things a little quicker and take away, we can focus more time in other efforts that generate that revenue and ultimately drive profits to the bottom line.
Very well put. And Tony, of course, this is going to be our first virtual event of the year, as you mentioned. If people want to sign up, how can they do that? And I also hear there's going to be a giveaway.
Yep. So go to live.freightwaves.com. You'll see a register button. There is a giveaway. Solo stove, very interesting giveaway. One of the things I talked to Kaylee this morning, I was like, I don't understand how there's a smokeless stove when you're burning wood, but she explained it to me. There's going to be networking opportunities, so networking, get in there to the chat. There's going to be a What the Truck with Dooner and his great guests that'll be on there. So definitely go sign up, get registered for that event. It'll be a good one, and it'll be, again, the first of 2023.
That's right, and of course, it is free of charge, so that's right. You can go ahead and get registered now, and I'm glad that you asked Kaylee to explain, because I feel like Kaylee needs another show just called Kaylee Explains, because she is full of knowledge. Speaking of which, we're going to go to Kaylee right now as she explains what's going on with the weather.
The key to the infinite knowledge, Anthony, is just an insane curiosity. When you have a question, you just got to figure it out. So, pro tip there. All right, we're going to go ahead and take our next look at weather, and we're talking about some severe impacts that are expected across the Central Plains and down into the Southeast here in the next few days. As that moisture and onshore flow from California starts to wrap up into a bigger overall pattern, we're going to be looking at the potential for some strong winds and then eventually a severe weather threat here in the next few days. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We do have that kind of low pressure center setting up across the Rockies right now, and as that comes down off of the Rockies, we're going to get this kind of lee, where it's called a lee side cyclogenesis, big word. So that means that we're just going to see a winter storm, a cyclone start to form coming off of those mountains with the help of that downslope flow. Now, as that happens, we're going to see ahead of that storm setup, some really strong winds reach across the northeastern parts of New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle, eventually into Oklahoma. Because of this, it's also pretty warm out there. Get some fire weather possibilities across the Oklahoma Panhandle and into the western parts of Oklahoma. Same thing in the Texas Panhandle as well. So Amarillo, that I-40 corridor, I-27 going down to Lubbock, and even along kind of those state highways between Lubbock and Wichita Falls, you could be looking at the potential for some fire weather here in the next few days. This means that any fires that start will spread pretty quickly thanks to those high winds. It has been fairly dry out there as well in West Texas. So those fires have the potential to spread very quickly. Further on down the road, we've got a day 3 severe weather outlook right now issued by the Storm Prediction Center. Pretty far out as far as details and timing go, but your major metro areas of Birmingham, Huntsville, Atlanta, and here in Chattanooga, we are included in this day 3 severe weather outlook. We're going to be looking at that storm as it develops to drape a cold front across the southeast. That cold front will lead to some severe weather development here for your Thursday into Friday. All modes of severe weather are going to be possible right now, mainly looking at some strong thunderstorms, heavy rainfall, strong winds. But we'll get some more details ironed out here as the next few days come along and we get those forecast details a little bit clearer. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back with Tony Mulvey again and Joe Antishak. Don't go away. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome into this week's edition of the Research Corner. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined remotely by Joe Antoshak. Joe, how's it going?
It's going well, Tony. What's up?
You know, I'm staying busy here on this second hour of FreightWaves Now. But, you know, this is an exciting segment because it's our chance to kind of look at what's going on, what we're looking at as a research team to kind of generate some of these ideas and these predictions of what's to come in the freight market. And one of those that we're looking at is we've seen Bank of America's credit card spending data has suggested we've had this shift back from goods to services spending. And obviously we track that physical goods economy very closely when we look at our outbound tender volumes. But then you also factor in that we've seen inventory levels. So we'll pull up a chart here. It's our outbound tender volume index. You see it there in the white line. We've got the past 3 years as well. So 2022 in the blue line, 2021 in the orange line, and 2020, 2019 in that green line. So we see that we've surpassed where we were in 2020. We've come back up out of the holiday lull to a healthy level, but not near as where the levels we were the past couple years. So, I mean, we look at this, we obviously see the decline leading from October, November, and December. We'll get fourth quarter earnings results from transportation companies starting here just within the next couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see their results. But as we enter the first quarter, obviously, Joe, when you see this chart, and obviously see the recovery in OTVI, but then you look at the past, you get back into that 2020, 2019, that green line. I mean, do you think we're in a position where we're going to stay kind of in between this 2022 and 2020, 2019 line? Or is it somebody, hey, this is just a sharp recovery, we're going to trend down here throughout the first quarter?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're right that, you know, this is like a very exciting time to be kind of analyzing the freight market and, you know, the wider market, right? There are a lot of unknowns as far as, you know, volume, if volume is going to stay in that in between or if it's going to contract more sharply. I don't know that I could really make a good prediction there. I mean, my hunch is that it'll be somewhere in between. I don't know that I'm a big proponent of the idea that things are going to crash. But right. I mean, it's like what we were talking about last week. We're at a point here at the beginning of the year where there are a lot of things that can affect the direction this year takes, and no one has a crystal ball. Some people say things a little bit more confidently than others, but really what we can do is just follow these indicators and see, where things are currently, and then get an idea of where they're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of those indicators that I look at, and obviously this one's a little lagging because it highlights what we saw happen in the previous month. But I mean, we start looking at credit card spending data just to get, it's not as broad as the retail sales numbers that we'll see, but it gives a little insight into how is consumer behavior shifting or changing. And we've seen that change. And we'll pull up a chart here from Bank of America's credit card report. And it's the services spending as a percentage of total spending. And we see that number is really bounced up. So you've got 4 lines here. And really the one to call out is this green line. And it tracks right over this navy blue line, which is 2019, and that green line 2022. The spending on services as a percentage of the household or the total card spending is roughly the same. I mean, we're talking about 38%. And I guess the question is going to be, is this sticky? Is this trend sticky that consumers are going to continue to shift back to services spending? Because ultimately, that's going to be one of these drivers of freight volumes. If consumers, this shift is sticky, which it would appear so because we're transitioning back to that pre-pandemic spending trends, then freight volumes will obviously suffer. Whereas the past 2 years, spending was heavy on goods that kept those volumes higher.
Yeah, that's right. And this is just like another reason to think that we're not yet seeing an indicator that would prove like a savior for freight transportation rates. That there's not like a single thing that is sticking out where it's like, oh, this may start to push spot rates back up, or in the trucking market at least, right? And I know we have a chart too from the Logistics Managers Index that came out last week about inventory levels, right? And if that is a sticky trend, that this share of card spending allocated to services, where that is higher than in previous years. That means that inventory levels are going to be slower to normalize or to come down. Mm-hmm. And right, just to give you an idea of this chart, this read 57.3 for December. That indicates still expansion, right? Mm-hmm. The rate of expansion is slowing, but it's still up there. And really that level is going to need to, in my opinion, come down into the contraction territory before it's like, all right, now we are approaching a real bottom.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another indicator we look at, right, is those inbound ocean TEU volumes. And we don't have the chart pulled up, but I mean, you see that level, it's normalized back to roughly 2019 levels. And I think that's an indication of these shippers have this bearish outlook kind of on, I don't say necessarily on the consumer, but just on orders in general. And they're just slowing that rate of ordering, which means less demand coming in, less freight coming into the country through fewer TEUs, which will ultimately lead to lower inventory levels because they'll just move the product hopefully at the same rate, but if it won't sit in inventories as long. But it's also going to lead to lower truckload demand. I mean, it eventually will flow into the truckload market at some point, but will be interesting to see how these consumer trends and if they change in the first quarter and really throughout the year, and if these trends are sticky and what that means for freight volumes. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining me on this week's edition of the Research Corner. We'll be sure to check in with you again. Right now, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for a final check of weather here this morning. We're continuing to talk about really the unsettled pattern moving across the whole United States. We've got little pockets of weather going on with a couple of big storm systems that will eventually turn into something impacting the majority of the country. So depending on where you're at and where you are looking to run these next few days, you're going to run into a myriad of different weather. So let's check it out on Sonar Critical Events. We'll move kind of west to east. So we've got right now the satellite presentation up, and again, you can see that really intense swirl storm going on in the Pacific Northwest right now. That center of circulation really right along that Oregon-California border, and still in the position to bring a ton of moisture onshore flow from the atmospheric river into central California. There are some places that are getting a couple of breaks in the rain today, specifically around the Monterey Bay area, which is really good because they need that break. But at the same time, we still have onshore flow, high winds, as well as some pretty high surf, bringing more coastal flooding to the area. So even as they get a rain break, those big waves are still flooding the area. A lot of the rain being centered down towards the parts of Southern California today. So from Santa Barbara down through LA, even down into the San Diego area, we'll be looking at some heavy rainfall, talking about picking up about another 2.5 to 4 inches of precipitation in some places. With that, we do have high wind warnings in place as well as high wind advisories, especially in those higher elevations, the mountains through eastern and central California. Sacramento, we've got a flood watch today, that I-5 corridor flooding expected all up and down it. Some places, especially outside of Fresno right now, we've got road closures as we have rock slides and mudslides impacting some of those minor highways moving through those mountain areas. And then in those eastern mountains, winter storm warnings in place. So you've got mixed precipitation and snow impacting there, specifically I-80 moving through into Carson City, Nevada. So really California is kind of just a big mess of weather right now. And a lot of this moisture is continuing to be picked up by the broader scale pattern and developing into those next set of winter storms right now impacting the Rockies. This will turn into another major storm, which will eventually move through the Central Plains and into the Great Lakes by the time the week ends. That's it for your weather today, and we're going to keep an eye on this as we continue to move throughout the rest of the week. Right now, we're going to toss it back over to Christian Thomas for our final edition of the Social Roundabout.
Thanks, Kaylee, for those weather updates. Now, believe it or not, last night, big game. Georgia Bulldogs against TCU. Of course, Georgia Bulldogs blew them out of the water. And I got to watch the game with Isaiah Buchanan. It was a good time. And I think we both were just excited as Coach Smart here getting that trophy again this year.
And the Georgia Bulldogs.
Now, like I said, me and Isaiah, big Georgia fans. We're Georgia boys, and so why not have a little bit of fun? I got a couple of tweets I want to show you. Here's one, a highlight from last night's game. Let's take a look.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
Puny god.
Yeah, that was definitely a beatdown. That's going to do it for our social roundabout, but I want to point out before I toss it over to our roundtable, Zach, you know, Georgia just surpassed the University of Tennessee for all-time wins. What do you think about that?
Dare I say them fighting words?
I mean, he's just throwing it out there.
He just is. He just is.
Billboard material for 2023.
Welcome into the roundtable. Bill Priestley here, along with, as you know, Zach Strickland and Anthony Smith. And we're going to kind of dovetail a little bit off of what Joe and Tony did with Research Corner and talk a little bit about kind of the fact that we've kind of benchmarked, or rather bookended the freight rise and fall since 2019. And I want to show a couple of charts here. Let's go to the first one here momentarily, which is one that they've already seen, or at least know of quite well. And that, of course, well, gentlemen, is the one, of course, you see numbers going up, numbers coming back down. We'll check that in just a second, actually. But you've seen this go. You've seen the trend go up. You've seen the trend come back down. How much different is 2019 right now to 2023 as we embark in here in January, Zach?
Yeah, so we're actually still. I mean, I'm assuming the chart you're talking about is the OTVI, kind of our benchmark volume truckload demand index. There it is, right there. You can see we're a lot closer to 2019 than we are to 2021 and 2020 at this point. Which isn't, we're actually a little bit, to me, it's a little surprising at how we're not already down below 2019, to be honest. Like, we're still seeing demand stickiness. We haven't found that bottom that I think a lot of people are projecting here in the next month or two. We heard Ravi Shankar talk about this. Yeah, and he kind of has said that we kind of expect this bottom to happen in the first quarter, or at least the first half of 2023, which I don't think is a big far off call. And he cites the reason for that being inventories starting to find their floor. Like, we finally started to get to that point where we're starting to correct. So we don't have that, but there's still some weakness in the macroeconomic environment to deal with.
All right, Anthony, where are we in your estimation 2019 to now?
Yeah, I think that old saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. I think this is definitely a rhyming scenario for 2019, but there's so many other factors that are, at play here that weren't at play then. One of the big things, of course, that we always talk about at FreightWaves is that you can have a freight recession without a macro recession, and vice versa. You can have a macro recession without a freight recession. Mm-hmm. Now we're kind of seeing, as Zach mentioned, a weakening in the macro economy at the same time. And so I think that's one of the big aspects that is really kind of playing out here. The big saving grace right now for a lot of folks and for the United States is going to be, of course, the job market for now. But as we know, looking at the past, that can shift suddenly. And so that puts us at an even weaker point right now. We're looking at what's going to shift potentially. I think Tony Mulvey and of course, Joe Enishak did a great talking point around the consumer, how sticky is going to be, is this demand going to be? And that's really always going to come down to the labor market. And as we look at the consumer conditions, I think they're a lot different than what they were in 2019, especially when we're looking at how over-encumbered a lot of consumers are with debt and what really that kind of looks like for the freight demand and how much consumers are going to be able to spend moving forward.
We've got another chart here about how prices have changed from 2019 to now. Hopefully we can pull that up here in just a second. But you saw, there it is. There, price of diesel obviously has gone way up. Price of eggs has skyrocketed. Lumber is a bit of a misnomer because obviously that number just shot through the roof and then has returned to somewhat of a sense of normalcy. And of course, the price of bread has gone up about 50 cents or so there as well. Of course, what's interesting about that chart, of course, is that eggs are in bread, and you wonder how on earth bread has only gone up that much when eggs have gone up the same amount. But you get a different idea of kind of the different economy, perhaps, that we're in at this point. And I get the sense sometimes that, it's kind of like after a sickness, you're kind of a different person. Maybe we're in a slightly different economy. What's your take on that?
Yeah, we're in a total different economy.
Yeah.
I think that's an understatement. And the price of eggs is due to the bird flu right now, that's actually like a short-term movement, which could potentially reflect into the price of bread eventually. So there's a lot of moving parts here. 2019, very different environment. We were still in what I would call a normalized world. Like, we didn't have COVID throwing all these things. We're still coming out of that COVID environment where, we had all this supply chain issues and a lot of restructuring went on during that time. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the environment that we're operating in now it's never going to go back to that 2019 style, in my opinion. It looks like people are starting to realize we can't just sit here and build infrastructure and make it last for 10 years anymore. Now we're looking at this. We need to build in some flexibility into how we manufacture our goods. The automotive supply chain is, of course, going through a dramatic shift to an EV-centric manufacturing cycle, which will be very different than the combustion engine. And that's going to change the way that freight moves across the country, because we're going to see at the same time we're pulling out of China. Not to the scale that a lot of people are probably thinking, but we're still coming up with alternative ways to source goods and manufacture goods. And COVID has kind of kickstarted this. It was already happening, but at a very slow rate. Now it's accelerating our rate of change.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, I remember, Anthony, you had mentioned a number of months back, there was this great migration, of course, that maybe precipitated that fall when we had from that height in terms of freight volumes, that people were moving from buying goods to buying experiences because they were being let out. There was the lockdowns weren't happening anymore. Was that perhaps precipitous of the fact that now you see people that are overextending themselves, and the fact that we spent money on goods because we didn't have any place to go? Now we then spent money on experiences because we could get out. Did that have some idea of precipitating what we're seeing now in terms of people just don't have the money, and they're using their credit cards, they're buying and putting stuff on layaway, things like that?
Yeah, I think all that really kind of goes into play here, especially when you're looking at the different forms of debt now. One of the big things that really kind of happened over the last few years was buy now, pay later. We still don't know the true impacts of that right now, and I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to be faced with, that we started to see at the end of last year that really, I think, is going to make its way seen throughout this year as well. But one of the big things, of course, is it's human nature, I think, to have almost like a short memory. And I think Americans take that to the next level, especially when you're looking at any types of consumption, any types of purchases. If you look at, there was this, salmonella outbreak at this fast food restaurant. Everyone just stops going there. Then next thing you know, everyone forgets about it and they're right back to it because I know I can't get enough of my, Chipotle burrito or whatever it might be. And so I think there's that short-term memory for a lot of folks out there. And I think one of the big things that we have to be mindful of, and I think Zach did a great point of mentioning about it, is that overcorrection. So this is something that we see not just from an individual basis, but from a company basis and from really a nationwide basis, is that overcorrection of saying, hey, I can't do this, now I'm going to go all in. Oh, we don't have this, we're going to double down on orders. Oh, we have too much of this, we're going to just get rid of all of it. Mm-hmm. So I think we're looking at this upcoming year, and really one of the big things that we have to be mindful of is going to be that overcorrection phase.
Zach, moving back to, I want to steal Joe Antashek's chart that he used concerning warehousing. And we went from this just in time to just in case mentality. Where do you think we are now moving forward here?
Yeah, this is an inventory levels by the Logistics Managers Index, and this is an extremely important chart to look at here. The fact that inventory levels are not growing as fast, I guess, or not expanding as fast as they were, that's a good sign, actually, because the quicker that we get back to inventory levels being normalized and manageable, the faster that we can get back to being more predictable in the way that we see freight movement across the United States. And that's what Ravi was really getting to, is that once shippers start ordering a regular cycle again, now again, it's going to depend on that consumer side, that consumer demand coming back, which Anthony's talked about a lot, that inflation going through products like eggs and bread, and then they have all this debt now that they didn't have before. There's a lot of headwinds for the consumer to want to order. Once we get inventories back in alignment, where is the demand coming from next? And right now, it's very unclear if that's going to recover, at least over the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, as we've kind of returned to kind of where we were in 2019, let me ask you both, going through the ride that we did from 2019 through 2020, 21 to now, would you do it all again, make the same decisions, or maybe what would you change in terms of making decisions, in terms of how we handle this entire thing?
I think from my perspective, it comes back to some of the last things I mentioned about that overcorrection, because we saw that whiplash of, ordering way too much and this overcompensating for, all right, we're all locked up, we're all going to need exercise equipment, we're all going to need an exercise mirror, we're all going to need an exercise bike, we're all going to need all this stuff. And now we have like these professional level Marvel Studio webcam setups for webinars, and now we might not need that. And so I think one of the big things that I would say that we would have to be mindful of if we could do it all over again is to be mindful of that overcorrection and just not going all in, and really being mindful of some of the balances for that all.
Any changes you would make?
It's easy to look back in hindsight. We had no clue what was about to happen, although I think in hindsight it's clear we overstimulated the economy. We probably need to pull back a stimulus payment and maybe at the very least make a targeted run at it. I know towards the end, I know the beginning was very hazy and we didn't know what was going on.
All right, well, that's how we bookend this rise and fall of the economy. It looks like we had a great party, and then we have a great hangover, of course, at the end of it there as well. We'll take a short break and come back after this with more FreightWaves.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for a final check of headlines this morning. The Transportation Research Board has stated they expect the shift from West Coast to East Coast for imports to continue. East Coast ports has spent a ton of capital on improving infrastructure. That gained a lot of praise from board members who say those investments have yielded facilities with the ability to take on the world's largest ships. However, people are now questioning if the East Coast has the warehouse capacity to handle the increase in imports. Warehouses on the East Coast generally have vacancy rates at 3% or below, and at one point, Savannah got down to 0.1% vacancy. However, the southeastern coast has the most room to add more warehouse space as needs grow. Andrew Clark, the former CFO at brokerage C.H. Robinson, has said that he would seriously consider an offer from the board to come back to the company as CEO following last week's firing of Bob Biesterfeld. Clark served as CFO from 2015 to 2019, called it a fascinating opportunity to take on the leadership role. However, sources speculate he is kept busy with multiple business interests that may take him away from the job. C.H. Robinson is using a search firm to find Biesterfeld's replacement. So far, no formal offer has been made. And railcar manufacturer Greenbrier has said that it will stop production of its railcars at its Gunderson facility in Portland, Oregon, after the company wraps up a current production commitment. The company is also undertaking a strategic evaluation of its marine business, which also operates in Portland. The marine business produces ocean-going barges. The closure will result in a non-cash charge of $24 million related to the impairment of long-lived assets, and the facility has been in production for over 100 years. You can find those stories and more by heading on over to FreightWaves.com, and you can also catch them in our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated, and go like us on social media as well. For the full FreightWaves TV experience, you can log on to tv.freightwaves.com. We're going to toss it back over to Tony and Donnie for our final carrier update of the morning.
Welcome into this final carrier update of the morning and our lanes of the day. Donnie, we touched on this lane, one of the lanes, looking in that western Midwest, where those rejection rates are high, and we're seeing
and that's
higher
what
rates.
we'll run through that. Since we looked at those lane rejection rates, we saw some of the highest rejection rates in that, prairie region of the western portion of the Midwest. So we'll pull up real quick, just throw up Omaha, Nebraska, to Davenport, Iowa. And so I just threw some of these in there random, no specific way of picking them. But it's a 300-mile trip. I wanted to kind of get a little bit of mileage in there. But, here we're at $3.81 for this average lane right now. Confidence scores are 1, so there's going to be a high volatility in this lane, anywhere from 324 to 447, depending on where you catch it, which is well over $1 a mile above this NTI.
Yeah, and this is one that's been increasing. It increased throughout the first quarter. I mean, we've got it here. You see it pulled up there September 18th, right? It was at this lane was 293. Yeah. It is now it is almost $1 per mile higher than what it was in mid-September. So I mean, it's
which on most lanes you see the opposite.
Exactly.
Yep. Well, let's go ahead and hit our little arrows here and turn this back around. Davenport going back to Iowa. Davenport, Iowa going back to Nebraska, $4.70 a mile. So here, this is a good 600-mile round trip. That's got a very healthy average on a rate per mile. But the area that we're in, we've watched Kaylee's weather updates. These areas, the reason a lot of people don't want to run it is it's very susceptible to storms, snow, ice, etc. Now, these owner-operators that run in these regions, they know what they're doing. They know when to run. They know when not to run. And they'll get up there and they will run in these bad weather conditions and be successful. Whereas some of these larger companies that have drivers that maybe don't have the experience, it might not be a good idea. So obviously keep an eye on the weather and how experienced your drivers are. Next chart here, let's pick a different lane here. We're going to look at Kansas City to Davenport, Iowa, since Davenport, Iowa is doing so well. But leaving Kansas City, we're not quite as well. But look, again, since mid-November, we've seen an increase in this lane. When a lot of lanes were going down, we still see this one picking up, and it hasn't peaked yet. Just above our NTI at 267. So Run this lane, maybe, maybe not. Maybe try to run this lane with your contracted rates would probably be a lot better idea right now. And let's switch around, see what Davenport, Iowa is coming back to Kansas City. Again, it's already peaked there, but still it's at 342.
Yep.
So this might be a good return lane to use spot rates to get back to Kansas City. And it's like it's a 363-mile run, so it's going to probably take you. You can probably get up there, unload, reload, get partial way back, and you're coming back at 342.
Not too bad.
So yeah, these are some good lanes to watch out for. And again, I'm trying to show you how I just kind of went through, found these on the lane rejection rates, and then throw them up here on the market dashboard and test these scenarios to see how good these lanes are. And that could help you pick maybe what destinations you want to use your contracted rates going to, and then use the spot market coming back.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, we can see it here, getting out of those really dense lanes. I mean, your LA to Dallas, LA to Chicago, those are going to be the lower paying rates where using a tool like this, you can get in there, plug it in, and find those rates that are still relatively healthy considering the freight environment right now.
Get out of the box, or you're just going to be stuck with those low rates like everybody else is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donnie, for this update. Right now, hand it over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you so much for those updates today. We are done here for your Tuesday, but plenty more content coming up on FreightWaves.
That's right. Put that coffee down, and we have Freightonomics coming up today at 2. And Kaylee, before we go, there's so much talk about the game last night. Got to mention, 2011, I was in Athens, Georgia. We had a game against Georgia. We lost. It was awful. But 63-16, we had a closer game than the national championship with Georgia.
There you go. It's good to be an Aggie, right?
It's good to be an Aggie.
There you go. Stick with us the rest of the day here on FreightWaves TV. We will catch you guys tomorrow morning starting live at 9. Have a good one. FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city